We all remember when those terrorists hit the Twin Towers in New York City on 9/11. We know that umpteen thousands died. Now, I don't know if what I'm about to confess will resonate with you or not, but let me try. It was a tough little moment of reality when I first thought about it. But here goes. I could not recall or remember if I'd ever heard a single name out of the many people who died. Do you? No, and neither in the Oklahoma City explosion back in April 1995. Not one of them. In some tragedies, like Columbine High School, some of the names ended up etched in our consciousness. But in the Timothy McVeigh bomb blast that rocked the world, I think many of us just had that horrible number 168 pound in our brains, but no names. We didn't know who these people were. You had to go and look for names. So I did. When McVeigh was finally sentenced in June of 1997, Newsweek magazine did a sidebar featuring two relatives of victims. They both shared their point of view regarding whether or not this mass killer should be executed. Donetta Apple, who was for the death penalty, lost a brother, Tom Hawthorne. Bud Welch, who was opposed to the idea of killing McVeigh, lost his daughter, Julie Welch, who was a Spanish language translator working for the Social Security Administration at the Murrah Building, lost her life as well in the blast. So there we have a couple of names, Tom and Julie, and 166 others. It's reality that people are often treated as nameless, as statistics, the nowhere man, the nowhere woman. Oh, we've got the numbers, 168 people dead. 10,000 in this earthquake, 20,000 over in that flood, 500,000 dying because of cigarettes each year. The tragedies pile up and the numbers pile up, but we don't have names. Maybe we're glad for that, for the numbing results of such anonymity. But right here, let's take this concept of nowhere man a bit further. We can rejoice over the fact that even when we don't know names, God always does. God knew Tom Hawthorne intimately. He knew absolutely everything in the world about him. The hairs on his head, the cells of his body, the thoughts in his brain, everything. The same with Julie Welch. From the moment she was conceived, we read in the book of Isaiah, chapter 42, God knew her, starting with when she was just a single cell at 9:03 a.m. Central Daylight Time on April 19, 1995. God knew her in every aspect, every detail. But now a question. In that fateful bomb blast with 2 tons of firepower created by fertilizer and fuel oil, there had to be some victims who almost just vaporized. One minute they were there, the next they were gone. And think about some of the other horrible crimes or tragedies of human history. How about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? In one fleeting instant, some people had dissipated. They evaporated into a cloud of radiation. There wasn't a body left. There wasn't DNA left. There wasn't anything left. They were gone. They truly were nowhere people. Ships go down at sea. Half a century later, some of the bodies of victims are just plain gone. There aren't bodies left, or tissue, or remains of any kind. The sharks and just the ebb and flow of currents and tides have erased any and every trace of what used to be a person. I could go on and on. What about cremation? Someone you loved is simply gone now. For a day or two, there were ashes, but once you took that final journey, that boat ride out to sea, and sprinkled those ashes, well, what was there left but memories? I think we could accept as Christians that even when a person is just plain gone, not only dead in the grave, but utterly and completely gone, that they would not be a nowhere man to God. You and I, several years after the funeral or after the bomb blast, might struggle with the inner turmoil of realizing that the memories are fading. I remember that poignant line from Shadowlands where a grieving C.S. Lewis says to his brother, "I can't see her, Warnie. I can't see her face anymore." But that's not going to happen with God, is it? Again, Isaiah chapter 49 and verse 16. "Though she may forget, I will not forget you." God's memory doesn't begin to dim with the passage of time, does it? But now this question. Believers around the world, not just in Oklahoma City or New York, hold on to the Bible promise of the resurrection. And if you read through the wonderful resurrection chapter, I'm referring to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, of course, you notice in verse after verse, God's guarantee that you and I and all who confess the name of Jesus will be present there with bodies. We won't be disembodied. We won't be just souls. The body that is sown is perishable, that is raised imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. And it goes on like that here in 1 Corinthians 15. For verse after verse, talking about bodies, real bodies, immortal bodies. In fact, in the New International Version, the heading for the passage beginning in verse 35 is exactly that. The resurrection body. Philippians 3:21 says much the same thing. When he comes back, he will take these dying bodies of ours and change them into glorious bodies like his own, using the same mighty power that he will use to conquer all else everywhere. Let me ask you a question. When Jesus came out of the tomb on Sunday morning, did he have a body? He most certainly did. That body had nail scars in the hands and a jagged scar in his side where that Roman spear went in. What's more, when Jesus reappeared to his disciples, you can read about that in Luke chapter 24, he made the very point, I have a body. Feel my hands. Feel my feet. I'm not a ghost. In fact, he then said, hey, what have you got to eat? I'm hungry. And here in the New Testament, we have the promise that all of us, even if we've been in the grave for 50 years or 50,000 years, are going to have bodies again too. So how does this work? Bodies in a casket decay. After a while, there's just bones left, then nothing. Bodies in the Alfred P. Murrah building disappeared in the blast. Bodies on the Titanic were swallowed up by the deep. How will God take these nowhere people, these people who have literally vanished from the face of the universe, and bring them back out of nothing? Well, let me make 2 points about that. First of all, in the words of the recent contemporary Christian song, all things are possible with God, that is. He doesn't need body remains or DNA or a skin sample in order to recreate one of his children. The Almighty Father who fashioned me and you in the first place can do so again, out of scratch. Bombs and sharks and Holocaust fires are no match for the creative power of the God who knelt down in the dust and made Adam out of dust. But here's the second point, and I tip my hat gratefully to my friend, the late Dr. Samuel Bacchiocchi, who wrote a great scholarly book entitled Immortality or Resurrection. It's an in-depth study on the Bible questions regarding death and the resurrection, and just what is going to happen to us when Jesus returns to this earth. Well, he establishes, first of all, that in the new earth, you and I, with our new bodies, will have identities. You will still be you. I will still be me. The disciples recognized Jesus that Sunday. It was him. Even in glorified, perfect, never to die again bodies, you and I and all of God's children will still have that essential spark, that imprint that makes us us. Maybe remember the line from the great love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. But now to the second word picture about the awesome power of our God. Bacchiocchi reminds us of how often the Bible talks about a special book up in heaven. It's called the Book of Life. Philippians chapter 4, verse 3 mentions it. So does the book of Revelation. We read about God's saints who have their names written in that book. The survival of personal identity, Bacchiocchi writes, is not dependent upon the continuity of physical or spiritual substances, but on God's preservation of the character or personality of each individual. What does this mean? It means that God remembers you. Your body may decay, dust to dust, doesn't matter. A bomb may destroy every tiny piece of tissue, doesn't matter. 1,000,000 years could go by. Photographs would fade. Archives describing you might be destroyed. Doesn't matter. If your name is in that book, if your identity is imprinted in the loving mind of God, He can bring you back in glorified perfection in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye. Bacchiocchi quotes from theologian Charles Hartshorne, who shares this beautiful truth. At death, human beings live on in the complete and infallible memory of God. Death cannot be the destruction or even the fading of the book of one's life. It can only mean the fixing of its concluding page. Death writes the end upon the last page, but nothing further happens to the book by way of either addition or subtraction. I like that. And of course, when God has you in His book, the last page of our little book isn't the end at all.